Hello, my name is Alexander Kerry. Welcome to the program. While the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is set to begin, Ukraine is pushing for the topics to focus on Russia's hostile behavior towards the country. Now, what can Ukraine expect from this meeting? For an overview on this topic, joining us in the studio today is Bohdan Ferens, member of Coordination Committee of Institute for Democracy and Social Progress. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon.
So the spring session of PAC is underway this week. It begins today on 23rd. And Ukraine has proposed certain topics to be talked and to be evoked, namely the Salisbury attack and illegal elections in Crimea. These topics have been refused to vote. How do you explain that?
It's parliamentary frame of cooperation between the European Union and Ukraine is very important, and we as a country that are challenging a lot of threats. We are trying to use a lot of these different platforms, added platforms, and I think it's very important to focus on the issues as security, as uniting of our partners, strategic partners, in the context of making reforms and fighting against corruption. That's why using all different platforms, as I just came back from the Strasbourg, that we had this Parliamentary Association Committee meeting between the EU and Ukraine. And the result is that final statements and recommendations was approved, and a lot of attention was focused especially on the Ukrainian sovereignty and further steps in the development, such as important topics as economy, as social care, and as a context of stability and security.
Isn't there a risk that the Syrian crisis put Ukraine on a bit of a background here?
Of course, yes. And we as a country, and I think it's important for our decision makers, especially in the frame of the foreign policy, to prepare and to put on the agenda some fresh items, and fresh issues, because it's always changeable. Because here in Ukraine we are thinking that we are number one and our topic number one.
Of course, but the world is evolving around.
In reality, it's a big challenge for us to be on the agenda inside the EU member states and in global context.
Now, the PSC is in a turmoil, is in the middle of a corruption scandal after an investigative investigation. Do you think it will have or already have an influence over the debates?
I think all decisions that have been approved in this frame will have some impact on our internal agenda too. And members of the European Parliament just try to explain how it is necessary to fight more in practical way with the corruption. Yes, they just welcomed that Ukraine has established some institutions in this context, but it's not enough, because the coordination between these institutions is very useful and important. The members of the European Parliament also were not so satisfied with the lack of progress in this regard too, and with the inability of the Parliament of Ukraine to counsel our new law concerning the e-declaration of NGO representatives who are fighting with the corruption. That's why, as you see, the corruption is still the main topic in the discussion between the European Union and Ukraine.
So how can Ukraine representatives can give guarantees that there's going to be progress in this matter?
Our delegation, the delegation of the Parliament of Ukraine, I think is trying to explain that some of the members were trying to explain that it's not so easy to change now the legislation as the law has been adopted. But the other part, I think a new generation of politicians, they were very straight in the demand that we need a cancellation of this not so appropriate law in this context, because really the EU side openly stated, as Mr. Hunt, for example, that it's not a good way to fight corruption, because civil society is needed to be protected from the pressure of the government or some other bodies.
So now you talked about the young generation of politicians, but there's no secret that in 2019 it's going to be election year. Do you think it's going to have an impact first on the reforms towards what we just talked about, and the relation between Ukraine and the EU?
I hope, because we need to change a political culture and political system of Ukraine. Without the new faces and new political parties and politicians, it's really difficult to do, because we can see now the fight inside Ukrainian political spectrum between the old corrupted elites and new political players. They are maybe weak because they have some lack of knowledge, experience, but I believe that our future and the future of this country in the democratic processes directly depends on the coming of the new forces and new politicians. And I think Ukrainians should support this. Not only in Kyiv, in big cities, but in small cities too, because we know that it's not so easy to win the elections in some districts, because these districts have their own owners, some small kings with money and with big influence, and for new forces, political forces, it's not so easy to fight this and to challenge this.
Well, so let's hope it will happen. And thank you for joining us for this overview. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Thanks a lot for the invitation.
That was Bohdan Ferens, member of Coordination Committee of Institute for Democracy and Social Progress. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for the rest.